All right, so we are recording, and then if anybody else pops up along the way, then we'll admit them, but we'll get started since we only have the 40 minutes. The Zoom it hasn't been extending our group meetings past the 40 minutes, so we probably only have 40 minutes today. So we'll kind of head right into the walking on a loose leash and building a connection, and then if we have any time at the end for other questions, I'd be happy to take some as well. All righty. So there's a couple of key pieces when we're teaching our dogs to walk on a loose leash. There are a few pieces to the puzzle that are important for us to understand and pay attention to if we want to actually teach our dog to walk on a loose leash rather than just managing our dog with the equipment. Okay, there is equipment out there, some equipment which we do not condone using in One Love, such as prong collars or slip collars, also known as choke chains. Okay, we do not use those equipment, but there are some people who use those to try to manage the dog from pulling. It does not ever fix the problem, though, let me tell you that. It will actually, if we're not using the equipment to manage, it doesn't teach the dog how to want to walk nicely with you on a leash. So it's important that we can still take the steps to teach the dog and not just rely on the equipment, even if we do use approved equipment from One Love, such as a harness, okay? Or sometimes there's also something called a martingale collar or a head collar or halter. Many of you know the brand Gentle Leader, which is the one that goes around the pup's face. It's not a muzzle. To some, it may look a little bit like one just because it comes over the nose, but it doesn't actually basket the snout at all. Okay, those are other types of equipment that can help a dog, help us control the dog walking on the leash, but it's all management. It doesn't actually help teach your dog how not to pull on leash. It just makes it uncomfortable for them to do so. So no matter what equipment you use, whether it's One Love approved equipment or not, the important thing is that we take the steps to teach our dog how to want to choose us over all of the distractions that are out there in the world when we're on a walk, because that is one of the top reasons that dogs do pull. I usually tell clients there are 3 big reasons that a dog is pulling on leash, okay? The first of those is that he may be overwhelmed by his environment in terms of just overstimulation. There may be so many things that he's seeing, smelling, hearing, feeling, kinesthetically, like things he's walking on or wind or anything like that, that he's so distracted that he basically can't even remember that you exist on the end of that leash. So he is just acting out in a state of high arousal, and that's why he's pulling. So sometimes that is one reason the dogs are pulling. Another big reason dogs end up pulling is because they are over, let me say this, they don't know that the leash is not a frustrating barrier, okay? So sometimes that kind of feeds into the third big reason. Okay, these two kind of go together. Sometimes we handlers use the leash to keep the dog connected to us because we are tethered to the leash. So physically we are connected, okay, by this nice thing here. But if the dog doesn't have the emotional connection with you, this is the only thing keeping you there. If this leash wasn't there, your dog would be off across the field or off across the street. So how we handle the leash is the other third big key. Sometimes we accidentally cause pulling in the leash because of how we are handling that leash, okay? So those are the 3 biggest reasons. A dog is overstimulated. He feels the leash is a frustrating barrier that's not allowing him to do what he needs to be able to do naturally as a dog. And the third thing is the way we handle the leash. So those are 3 things we're going to talk about first, okay? If your dog is overstimulated because there's so many things going on outside and that arousal level is high, he's not pulling you because he's trying to be a jerk. He's pulling you because, as I mentioned, he can't even think about what is happening on the end of his leash, okay? So in those cases, while it sounds a little oxymoronic to do this, sometimes we think, oh, if we just keep walking, then the dog will fall into pattern. Usually that is the opposite of what we need to do. If a dog is overstimulated by his environment and we try going from A to Q, we're just going to keep losing the dog. So sometimes when your dog is overstimulated, very often the best thing to do is stop, slow everything down, and give the dog a chance to just process all of those distractions in their environment at a rate that the dog needs to process them. okay? This is where I always tell clients to remember again how different a dog's senses are from our senses. Dogs can smell things that we cannot smell. They wouldn't even register on our radar, okay? We humans have about 7 million scent receptors in our noses. Dogs, depending on the breed, can have around 220 million scent receptors. That is way more than our measly 7 million, okay? So there are things out there that they are smelling that have been there for a week that give them all sorts of information that we wouldn't even be able to pick up on. So it's very easy for them to get overwhelmed by smells, especially some breeds like hounds, like beagles, okay, or foxhounds or any of that, versus some other breeds even, okay? There's also sorts of things that they can hear that don't register in our eardrums. They hear all sorts of pitches and tones that we do not hear, okay? It's actually been estimated that if you take a piano key, the whole piano set, you would add 20 other keys to the high octave end that a dog could hear that would not register for us, okay? So there are a lot of sounds that a dog is hearing differently than we are, if at all, okay? We may not even be hearing those things, but a dog is. And a dog also sees things differently than we do, okay? Their eyesight is quite different from ours in several ways. They have more cones in their eyes than rods. I won't get into all of that, but the short version is they're almost like superheroes in terms of how much information they are taking in at one point of time because of all of their senses, whereas we humans can tune a lot of those things out there. So if our dog is overwhelmed by all the stimuli around us, the first thing is to stop for a minute, let them process. Okay, yep, I hear that sound over there. What is that? Okay, I see that statue over there. Oh, yep, I smell that squirrel was there 2 days ago. Now I have no idea where it went. You know, give them a chance to kind of process all that and remember that you exist. Okay, so that's kind of one way to deal with that first one. The second one, okay, seeing it as a frustrating barrier, that's why I say it has to do with how we see the leash. Leash reactivity is a very real thing, okay, where oftentimes dogs, it happens most often like with other dogs or with people, where if that dog was not on a leash, he wouldn't be barking and snarling and lunging towards another dog. But if he's on a leash, he starts becoming reactive because he feels that that leash is a frustrating barrier. It is prohibiting the dog from communicating in the way the dog naturally needs to communicate or keeping himself safe. And so what ends up happening as a result of that is all that snarly, barky, lungy behavior we see at the end of that leash, okay? So I know, Mike, I think you were experiencing some of this with your foster, right? Some of the dog reactivity.
Yeah, it's not snarly, it's not aggressive. It's playful yippy, but to like a way high, like where
Okay.
he's flopping around like a fish.
Okay. So
Yeah.
even if she's really, really excited, some of that does kind of go the same way where because of this leash, it just amplifies that level of arousal because the dog can't really do what the dog needs to do to cope through that situation. And then that third piece of the puzzle is how we handle that leash, okay? Which in a case like that, if our dog is lunging on the end of that leash, what is our typical reaction as the handler, right? Our typical reaction is we don't want the dog to whirl around like a dervish, and we don't want to look to others that we don't know what we're doing. So we try to control our dog. And the way that we do that is by pulling the dog into us and trying to hold them still, right? And that actually does the opposite of what we want it to do. It increases arousal. So instead of helping your dog calm down, it actually makes all that arousal fester higher and makes that reactivity, or in the case of your dog, Micah, excitability, any of that arousal just goes higher. It's like adding fuel to the fire that's already burning, okay? So what's going to be important when we use this leash is that we resist the urge to pull and add more tension in that leash, okay? Not only does it increase arousal, but dogs have the same reflex that we humans have. If I was to take your arm and pull you this way, what is your natural reaction? Okay, your natural reflex would be to stabilize yourself and pull opposite direction of where I am pulling you, okay? It is called the oppositional reflex. We humans have that, dogs have that same reflex. So when we pull on the leash, it is a very natural dog reflex to pull against it. So sometimes when we're pulling on the leash, we are creating a battle of wills, if you will, between the human and the dog. And so it just becomes a tug of war on the end of that leash. Okay, so it's really important that we can understand what our role on the end of that leash is, and that way we can also help the dog understand their role on the end of that leash, okay? So the best way to do that, the analogy I use with my clients all the time, is think of yourself on the end of that leash like a tree, okay? If your dog was on a leash and attached to a tree, if your dog is pulling and trying to go, let's say you have 6 feet of leash, and that dog tries to go 7 feet, then what happens? The dog can't go to 7 feet, that leash gets tight, your dog starts pulling into the collar or the harness, maybe rearing up on his little back legs, and that is because he is going beyond the boundary that is being set for him. Or of course he's trying to. He can't really go because that tree is not moving and letting him go further, okay? The tree is also, however, not pulling back on him. The tree is a fixed point, okay? So it is a very straightforward, sturdy kind of energy. It's not waffling one way or the other, providing pulling or feasibility of moving forward, okay? It is a fixed point. So if there's any tension on that leash, it is because your dog is putting it there, okay? It is then up to your dog to figure out, how do I get rid of that tension? If they stop pulling, the tension in the leash goes away. Or if they move closer to the tree, the tension in the leash goes away, okay? That is an important piece in teaching your dog how to walk on a loose leash with you, as well as building that connection with you, okay? If they remember, oh yeah, I'm attached to this tree, then they're gonna stick closer to the tree, because if they realize they have to go further from the tree, there's gonna be that tension. And that's the same type of thing with you. Now, you of course have a lot more to offer than a tree. A tree isn't giving a dog a relationship, really isn't giving a dog connection or communication or any reward or anything like that, okay? So you have that added bonus of really helping from your end to build the connection where your dog wants to choose to be with you over the other things in his environment, okay? But for the sake of us being on the end of that leash, we really want to think of ourselves like a tree and not be pulling the dog, yanking the dog on that leash, okay? So that's kind of our role at the end of that leash, be like a tree. Now, the other thing I always tell people is that when this leash is attached to your dog, and obviously this is on the either the collar or the harness, okay, wherever this is attached to on your dog, you want to keep it like this as often as possible. If it's like this, you can see the tension in my leash right now, right? Okay, you can see that it's taut. If it's like this, there's no tension there, okay? This is really our goal of what we want that leash to look like when we're walking with our dog, okay? We don't want it to look like this, because then the dog is pulling us or we are pulling the dog, and either way, it's that tug of war. So we want to try to keep this leash with a little J in the loop there, okay? Now, that takes building the connection for your dog to say, I want to stick close enough to you where this J is going to be here. We'll get back to that in a minute, okay? But first, I want to show you the best way that I recommend to clients to handle the leash, so that is for the dog's best safety as well as your best safety. It is very easy for us when we have a leash, okay? And I should say this at first. I do recommend using a regular leash. This is a regular 6-foot leash. I never recommend using a retractable leash. There's a lot of problems that come along with retractable leashes from a safety standpoint, but also, this is something that most people don't think about. When you have a dog on a retractable leash, the dog may be able to move out and take some space, but in order for that to happen, he has to pull in the leash to go where he wants to go. So it actually teaches your dog to pull to get to where you want to go. Pulling is rewarding. That is the opposite of what we want to teach our dog when he's on a leash, okay? So under no circumstances do I ever recommend clients use a retractable leash. I always recommend they use a regular flat leash, not even like the bungee kind, because the bungee kind has a lot of give to it as well, okay? A regular leash, it doesn't matter if it's cotton webbing, if it's nylon, if it's leather, the material is up to you, okay? Some are like the round rope kind. That's up to you, whatever you feel comfortable. But I would use a regular like 6-foot leash, maybe even a little bit longer if you need to at times, okay? So that way there's no give in that leash, okay? It's not like the leash is gonna be pulling for you. You are the one who determines the leash length depending on how much you gather up in your hand versus how much you feed out to the dog. So you can use this leash handling technique no matter what length of your leash. but I always do recommend probably at least a 6-foot leash, because sometimes we have leashes that are only like 2 feet and we try to keep the dog right here next to our side the whole time in a heel position. And because of that oppositional reflex that I said before, most dogs are automatically going to pull if that leash is too short, especially if they're the type of dog that just naturally has a longer stride. Like you take like shepherds, for example. German shepherds have a long stride. Their stride is actually longer than ours. So when we try to hold them only 2 feet from us, they are pulling before they even get a full stride in, which means then that they have to kind of move very restricted. They're going to get frustrated. That walk is not going to be helpful for them. It's going to be frustrating for all of us. No one's going to have a good time. Okay, so I recommend having at least 6 feet. It doesn't mean that you always have to give the dog 6 feet if you're in a tight space. That's when you gather up the leash. When you're in a little more open of a space, you can feed out that leash length. As long as there are no dangers in that 6 feet, I say there's no reason you can't give the dog 6 feet of space as you're working, so that way the dog has a little bit of a choice in the matter. Okay, dogs do not naturally want to always remain right by our left hip all the time. Okay, that is not fun for a dog. It's easy for us because that means that walking is easy peasy. The dog's right there. I don't have to worry about tripping over the dog or the dog moving away from me. But I always tell people that that kind of healing stature is useful in like obedience routines and things like that, but it doesn't work very well for giving your dog the real exercise that he needs from a walk. Because a dog needs to be able to sniff. They need to be able to process their environment. They need to be able to move their large muscle groups around, which sometimes they can't do if they're stuck right to your hip the whole time. Okay, so I always say a walk is way more productive for the dog as an outlet when you give the dog what he needs on that while setting some parameters of your own at the same time. But this is where that leash is a parameter. If you have 6 feet of leash, you are only going to give your dog that 6 feet of leash. If he tries going over and pulling towards a tree that's 9 feet away, he can't reach it because you only have 6 feet. But if he stops and decides he wants to sniff at something that's 4 feet away, or if he wants to go over onto the right side instead of the left side, that's fine. He can still have a little bit of freedom to do what he needs to do within your parameters, which is your 6 feet. Okay, so you're still controlling that situation, but you're giving your dog a little bit of autonomy along the way so that he can make some choices and still feel happy on his walk and not so controlled where he's like, oh my God, why do I have to do this? We don't want him to feel like he has to walk with you. We want him to feel like he wants to walk with you. And if you help your dog want to walk with you, guess what? As a side effect of that, the tugging in the leash goes away and your dog will actually walk with you on a nice loose leash because he wants to choose you over everything else instead of trying to get away from you because you're just micromanaging him the whole time. Okay, so this is how I recommend holding the leash. Okay, again, this part is attached to the dog. We have all of this 6 feet of length. Okay, if you don't want to give your dog all 6 feet, then you gather up the excess in your hand. But every leash has a loop. Some people love to do this and wrap around their hand or their wrist. This is a very unsafe way to hold the leash because if your dog pulls suddenly, you don't want to break a wrist bone, a finger, anything like that. I mean, and depending on if you're doing this, like all that tugging motion, you can also injure an elbow or a rotator cuff. Not very safe for you, okay? So what I always tell people is this is the loop. You can either put this over your thumb if your grip is pretty good, unless you have arthritis or something like that. All your power is in the palm of your hand. So if you keep your hand closed like this, that dog can pull till the cows come home, but your brake is right here. He's not going anywhere. Think of your thumb as your safety. This is your brake. All the power is in the palm of your hand, okay? If you must feel maybe your grip isn't the best, okay, you put this around your wrist. The power is all still in the palm of your hand here. Do not wrap this part around your hand. There should be nothing around your hand on this end to keep you safe, okay? The other thing that that does, which people often don't think about, if we wrap this like this, what is happening to the leash as I'm wrapping? Did you see how it shortened its length because it was being pulled? Okay, if that's attached to your dog and now you wrap this around, you are adding that tension to that leash. The opposite of being a tree, like we said before. You are adding the tension, you are making your dog pull more against you, okay? So I don't recommend wrapping that leash at all. Instead, fold up the excess in flat loops in your hand, kind of like folding like a Christmas ribbon or something, okay? That way, all the loops are here in your hand, and here's the leash, okay? The clip attached to your dog's collar. If you want to give your dog a little bit of space, look, you can feed out a loop. Now they have 3 feet. Now they have all 6 feet, okay? This just takes a little bit of getting used to how to move your fingers around the leash like this, okay? But I will tell you, if you practice without a wiggly dog on the other side, this will come a lot more naturally. Once you commit it to muscle memory, it'll be a lot easier. You won't even have to think about it so much. In the beginning, you may have to, okay? If in the beginning, and I'll show you from the inside perspective, okay? If you have to think about, yep, I got to gather it up, close my fingers around it, gather up the next loop, close my fingers around it, okay? But notice how, again, nothing's on the back side of my hand, everything's in here, okay? So again, if I want to give leash to my dog, I just drop a loop, okay? There you go. If I don't want to give leash to my dog, okay, then I just put the brake on. If dog tries going here, I don't release. Notice how my little brake, my hand here closes around the leash. I don't let any of the loops out, okay? So that is going to be the safest way for you and your dog, okay? Nobody can get hurt if everything's in the palm of their hand. And in terms of where to hold your leash, keep it close to the core of your body. If you're doing one of these with your dog and you're off balance, it's going to be a lot easier for your dog to pull you off your feet and you can get injured, okay? But if you keep your hands close to the core of your body, that also tells your dog that you know what you're doing and you're kind of in charge of yourself. You're not so waffly, easily pulled off your feet, okay? So that's the leash handling part. Now, when we want to get the dog to move with us, the best thing is that I use a couple of, basically there's 4 key pieces we want to think about. The first is giving the dog some cues that say that we're moving or we're changing direction. When I want to start moving or keep moving, okay, like if I don't want a dog to stop and sniff and pee on a mailbox, I will use the same term to keep moving. I use let's go, okay? Let's go means we're moving, no questions asked. So when you're teaching your dog let's go, you want to say let's go, turn, go like you mean it, and reward your dog as soon as your dog comes with you, okay? Now the key points there is when you say let's go, you do have to go in the direction you're trying to go like you mean it, okay? If you just hang around and say, okay, like, let's go, but you don't actually go anywhere, your dog is going to pay more attention to your body language than the words that are coming out of your mouth. So if you're not going anywhere, he's also not going anywhere. He's not going to take you seriously. So you need to turn your shoulders and go in the direction you mean to move in like you are on a mission, okay? If let's say your dog isn't going with you at first because he's really distracted by that other dog over there, you still have to go like you mean it, okay? Now, the difference is you're not yanking on your dog to go with you, okay? But your dog is over here, you are over here, and a funny thing happens. If you say, let's go, and you start walking like you mean it, you outweigh your dog. Most of our dogs weigh less than we do, okay? So physics tells us that a force going in this direction that weighs more is going to have more power, okay, than a force going in this direction. So if you say, let's go, and you start moving, again, you're not going to yank your dog to go with you, but you're just going to go like you're a train leaving the station. If your dog is attached to you, your dog has no choice but to ultimately go with you when he realizes this isn't negotiable. You are moving whether he wants you to move or not. So as soon as he comes with you and says, oh, okay, mom's going, I really got to go. Yes, good job. Tell your dog how fantastic that is, okay? But again, you're not yanking on that leash. You are just guiding the dog because you are moving until your dog moves with you, okay? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, if you give up, if you say, let's go, and the dog doesn't go and you stop, then the dog is not going to take you seriously. He's going to realize let's go doesn't mean anything. So let's go has to mean we're moving, okay? I use a direction change as well. So if I'm going to change direction, like let's say I start moving in this direction, but then I decide I want to go over here, I don't just turn and yank the dog with me. I give him another verbal cue. I use this way. So the dog knows then we're turning direction and we're going to move, okay? Think of it like a blinker on the car. You're giving him a little heads up that says you're turning, but the same concept applies to the let's go. If you say this way, you've got to turn your shoulders again in the direction you want to change to and move like you mean it. Reward your dog when he follows you, okay? Then there's two other things we want to pay attention to. The first is a check-in. That is when your dog offers you eye contact without you prompting him or begging him for it, okay? So if your dog is outside around distractions and on his own accord, he stops and looks at you, hey, good job, buddy. Make it a really great thing. Lots of praise, several good high-value food rewards so that he realizes, wait a minute, it's rewarding to pay attention to you instead of all this other stuff out here, okay? Now, we don't want to bribe the dog by holding the food in our hand because then, of course, every dog knows what this means. Or if you're walking with your hand in your pocket the whole time or in the treat pouch, the dog also knows what that means, okay? So you don't want to bribe the dog. Sometimes teaching a check-in takes a little bit of time in the beginning because it is something we have to wait for the dog to offer. So sometimes what I recommend with people, walk out your front door and just stand there and wait for your dog to check in with you. When your dog checks in with you, throw a big party. Yeah, good job. Lots of good praise and some good treats. Then let him kind of get distracted by something else again. Wait for him to check in again. A funny thing will happen if your reward system is strong enough. Your dog will learn to check in with you way more often, okay? There are some dogs that naturally as a breed aren't that prone to giving eye contact just because they're so attuned to their other senses. For example, my Corgi Scout, when he was a puppy, Corgis are, I see some Shepherds doing this a lot, or like Aussies, especially in herding breeds. They hear so well, those little ears are like antennas, okay? So they don't need to turn and look at you. They know exactly where you are because they are hearing all your movements and they feel you behind the leash, okay? So they don't actually have to stop looking at what they're looking at to turn and look at you, unless you teach them how valuable that is. So when Scout was a puppy, I had to actually do what I was just saying before. I had to wait for those check-ins. And when he stopped and checked in with me, good boy, and I threw him a big party, and it was so rewarding, then a funny thing happened. He started thinking, wait a minute, you mean all I have to do is like look at you sometimes? Okay, I could do that, okay? So now, I mean, he's 10 now, but still to this day, we're out walking and he'll be walking along, he'll be looking at stuff and they'll be like, hey mom, do you see that over there? Like, cool, he'll check in with me, okay? So that is how you're gonna have a nice connection where it's not this leash that's keeping you connected, it is your relationship that's keeping you connected. When your dog can look at things in the environment and choose you, that is one of the strongest things you can ever teach your dog, okay? But the hard thing about the check-in is that it's not on a cue. You don't tell the dog to check in with you. You wait for him to offer it, then you reward the heck out of it, and then you can build that skill of that connection, okay? Then the other piece to the puzzle is name response. That is if you have to get your dog's attention on your terms, okay? Maybe there's a car coming in the road, or maybe there's a snake in the grass you don't want him to go near, or something like that, okay? If you have to get your dog's attention, the best way to do that is by building up a strong name response so that you can call his name. I can say, Scout, and Scout can be like, oh, hey mom, what's going on? What do you need from me, okay? If you can build up that nice automatic response that says, I love responding to my name, that is how you're going to be able to use that to get your dog's attention when you're out and about around distractions. But you do have to practice building a strong name response, not just when it's boring around your house, but around different kinds of distractions. And you may have to start by being very close to your dog and exciting when you call them, okay? If you call your dog, hey, Scout, he's not going to want to pay attention. Nobody wants to pay attention when they feel they're going to get yelled at, okay? They're going to actually avoid that interaction. So if you want him to know that I need your attention, but you want to give your attention to me, do it in a happy way, call him in an excited tone. When he pays attention to you, throw a big party. That's how you're going to get him to learn he wants to respond to you when you ask for it, okay? So the difference between the check-in and the name response, the check-in the dog does on his own, the name response is when you have to cue to get his attention, okay? So you put those four things together, check-in, name response, let's go, and this way, and that's how you're going to walk with your dog on leash, okay? That's how you're going to build up that he's going to want to choose you over everything else, okay? Now, it also means that as you move, you're going to do a couple of additional things. In the beginning, when your dog doesn't really know how to do this yet, it is not about distance. It is not about how far you're walking. It is more about the quality of the connection and keeping that leash loose way more often. So what I always tell people in the beginning is that your walk isn't going to be a real walk. It's going to be more of a training exercise. So you may go back and forth and play what we call a follow me type game, where you're practicing, let's go this way, okay, and you're doing it back and forth, maybe in the same 20 yards, okay, back and forth a whole bunch of times. Even if you only go the same 20 yards over and over again, your dog's mind is moving, his body's physically moving, because yes, he's physically moving, but he's also learning. So that's still good exercise for your dog, even if you didn't go 3 miles, okay? You're still making a better quality connection and quality of having that leash be loose. So playing that follow me game initially with your dog is a great example of what to do. Throw in a lot of frequent direction changes, okay? When I'm starting to go with my dog and walk with my dog, I'll say, let's go. Good job, puppy. Reward this way. Good job. Reward. Okay, you may only move a few steps at a time, especially if there's a lot of distractions going on around you. If you go too long in between reinforcement, your dog is going to get lost by the environment. Okay, so playing that follow me game in the beginning and going back and forth quite a bit, rewarding your dog every step of the way, can really help build that connection. So then when you start adding more distance to it and longer duration in between reinforcement, he's not going to feel like anything's really changing. He's already going to know how rewarding it is to choose you and to give his attention to you, instead of pulling towards that other dog or pulling towards that fire hydrant I want to sniff or whatever else. Okay. So that just takes a little bit of practice in the beginning, playing that follow me game. Okay, it's more about the quality of the connection, less about the quantity of how far you're walking. Okay, the next piece of that puzzle is that a lot of times it is easier for a dog to learn if you minimize the distractions by going back and forth in the same spot for a bit, as opposed to just doing a loop where everything is new and stimulating the whole time. There are constantly new smells, constantly new sights and sounds the whole walk, okay, versus, hey, we went over here and we came back, and then we went over here and we came back, and then by the second or the third pass through, your dog is like, okay, I already checked this stuff out. Oh, hey, you know, you're pretty exciting after all, okay? So that's a good way to start building up that walking on a loose leash and that connection as well, is not just fighting against all the other distractions by keeping them new and exciting the whole time, okay? So that's another thing that's going to help you. And the last thing that's going to help you is to use distance as your friend, okay? The closer you are to identified triggers that you know are distracting for your dog, the harder it's going to be for your dog to want to choose you over those distractions. So if I, for example, know, oh, hey, my dog's going to want to go pee on that fire hydrant, and now I walk him within 2 feet of that fire hydrant, good luck getting him not to pee on it. It's right there, okay? So if I want him to say, oh, who cares about that fire hydrant? I'd rather walk with you. Then when you're first teaching your dog, you want to maybe give a good berth of, you know, depending on the dog and the level of the distraction, maybe 8 feet, 10 feet, okay? Give yourself a little extra space so that your dog can say, oh, well, I guess I can't get to the fire hydrant. Oh, but you're here, cool, I'll hang out with you. Yes, good job, buddy. You really reward him for being with you as opposed to wanting to go to the fire hydrant. You make yourself more valuable to him than the other things that are happening around him that are just distractions, okay? Ideally, we want your dog to notice distractions in the world, okay? We're not trying to put blinders on your dog and say, pay no attention to anything. You can't look at anything. You can't talk to anybody. That's not fun for him, okay? We want him to be able to notice the things out there, but we just want him to be able to make a choice to say, okay, I see those things, but I care more about you, Mom, behind the leash than I care about those things, so I'll stick with you, okay? It's the analogy I use with clients a lot, is it's like, just because you're married doesn't mean you don't notice people that are good looking of the opposite sex. It just means you don't do anything about it, okay? So you still notice good looking people, but you don't hit on them, or you don't go have drinks with them or whatever, okay? You still are just, you look but you don't touch in a way. So that's kind of the same thing with your dog. He can still see the distraction things out there, but he learns, I don't care that much about those distractions. What I really care about is right here behind my leash. And it's not because we're using this to say, well, haha, sorry, buddy, you're stuck. You have to be with me. We're doing it because we're teaching him that he wants to be with us instead of everything else, okay? Depending on the level of distraction that you're contending against, sometimes you can just use the dog's regular kibble. So it's okay if you're using a lot of food, because I will tell you this, in the beginning, you're probably going to go through quite a few treats when you're out practicing this walk, because every time your dog does a check-in or a name response or a let's go or a this way, you're going to reward him. Okay, so you're probably going to go through quite a few treats in these beginning phase. All right, but if you take some out of his food amount for the day, he's not going to get pudgy and unhealthy, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, it's more important to use the food where it counts for training. Okay, but if, let's say, in some situations there's a lot of distractions going on, that kibble isn't enough for him, that's when we may have to use higher value treats. Okay, just to touch again on a value hierarchy for dogs, they are carnivores by nature. So something that is much more meat-based, like some freeze-dried liver or some chopped up chicken or some, you know, freeze-dried bison meat or something like that, chicken jerky, salmon jerky, those things are going to naturally mean a lot more to your dog than like little biscuit type cookies. Okay, so I always recommend bringing quite a few treats with you. Make sure that they're already bite-sized, whether you buy them already in bite-sized pieces or whether they come in larger chunks like some of the meat things I was mentioning. Like I get beef lung a lot. It just sounds gross, but it's just freeze-dried beef lung. Dogs tend to love it. And it comes in a big piece like this. So I have to chop it up into all these small pieces in order to be effective, because a dog only needs something the size of a pea or a dime for one reward. Okay, if you give him something that's this big that he has to chew on, dogs have very low short-term memory. So by the time he's done chewing on something, he's already going to forget what you rewarded him for if he's going to have to chew on it for 5 seconds. Okay, so it's best to have something small and bite-sized. That is going to help your timing be much more efficient. Okay, so what I do when I buy those high-value treats that are just meat, I cut them up on a cutting board when I buy the bag. I put them all back in the bag so they're easy enough to grab when I'm going to get ready to go out on my walk. I don't have to spend the time cutting them up, but my dog loves them. My training can be effective. My timing can be efficient. Okay, and then also your $10 bag, it may cost you $10 to buy a bag of those kinds of treats that are just meat. But if you cut them up into a lot of small pieces, your $10 is going to go much further. So it won't feel like you're spending a lot of money in order to train your dog effectively. All right. So any questions about walking on a loose leash?
I have a quick one.
Sure,
She
Micah.
doesn't seem to be interested in any treats when she's outside because she's so like I can't. It's like hard to reward her, and I don't know if I don't have high value enough treats, but I have that beef freeze dried, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually a great point to bring up. If your dog cannot even take, you may have to try, maybe she's not into that beef. Maybe, for example, some dogs prefer certain proteins versus others. Maybe she's really into the fish variety, or maybe she's more into poultry than red meat or whatever. Okay, so you may try a few different varieties. But even if it's the top stuff, like even if you just use like some regular chopped chicken left over from dinner and your dog still isn't interested in it, that usually lets you know she's already so far over threshold, she can't even think about eating. So at that point, you may just stop, let her continue to take everything in, depending on the dog and how much stimulation there is, and also how well they self-modulate. Sometimes you may be standing in one spot for 3 or 4 minutes. That's fine. Okay, but that can help your dog get more comfortable processing the distractions and then being able to come down enough where she can think clearly. And then when she can think clearly, she can say, oh yeah, wasn't there someone on the end of my leash? Oh, hey, Dad, there you are. Okay, so that's then when training can occur. Training is not going to occur when your dog is up there at 60. Okay. And usually a sure sign that the dog's all the way up there is if they can't even think about food. Okay. Yeah. All right, now I think we are going to get ready to lose you. My screen is telling me we have less than 1 minute, okay? But I will put this, I'll post this on Facebook so that we can read through it or